Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you can see and hear and understand everything that's going on. If not, please shout in the chat box and let us know. Thank you for coming to this RTS Futures session, an introduction to mobile phone journalism. The way that today is going to work is we've got two mini masterclasses of about 15-20 minutes each from Vivian Morgan and Toby Sadler. So those will be looking at storytelling for mobile and video journalism and getting the best out of your mobile phone. And then we'll have a Q&A section of about half an hour where we're taking your questions. So at any point during today's session, please stick that in the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen, I think. So let's get started. Our first session is storytelling for mobile and video journalism from Vivian Morgan. If you bear with me 1 second, I will share that with you now.
Hello, I'm going to talk to you about storytelling because that's what journalism is all about. Putting words and pictures together to make a report or a film interesting and to engage an audience. So how do you make it interesting? How do you keep somebody watching? Well, how about if I asked you to tell me the most interesting fact about yourself in a single sentence? Could you do it? Well, unfortunately, we're not interactive, so I can't hear what your replies might be. But how about if I tell you one of my own? I almost died scuba diving. Well, how do you react to that? Hopefully you want to know more. What happened? How did it happen? And that's the so what factor. That's how you engage an audience and hopefully keep them. And you're only doing that by making a story interesting. Now, doing storytelling is really about a process, a discipline. 80% of it is probably logistics, 20% is creativity. So it's a process that you follow, and maybe it's like making a sandwich, is that you have the top slice of bread, which is your opener and your grabber, maybe your single sentence, which sets up what the film's going to be about. In the middle, you have your content, which is your meat and pickles or cheese and tomato, which is really literally the meat of your sandwich or your story that develops and you engage and keep the audience involved. And then there's the end slice, the back slice, and put together with the closer, hopefully if you made something which is interesting and dynamic and does what you want. Is it a call to action? Is it asking people to donate? Is it just informing because it's a news report? Whatever it is, if you follow a process, you have every chance of making it interesting and keeping your audience. So what is a report made up of? Let's have a look at this clip from a Channel 4 news piece. And what I want you to do is to look at what the film or report is made of. What are the different elements in it? Write down what you think the story is composed of, and then check it against what I'm going to tell you I think is involved. Okay, let's take a look now.
Of course, many people question the value of taking children out of school for something like this.
You know, I think Greta Thunberg is a 2-time Nobel Prize nominee. She's spoken at the UN, and I think that for any child, getting an opportunity to hear her speak is going to be invaluable education.
Thank you, and let's march!
And march they did. Police estimated more than 15,000 joined in. Organisers claimed it was more like 30,000. They scrambled for a view of the star attraction, her audience finding any vantage point they could.
This is monumental, I think. I think seeing this massive crowd of people coming together, I think it's amazing.
What do you think she's doing that you like?
Trying to save the planet!
But not everyone in Bristol today was impressed.
They can protest on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook. They don't need to block the road, block the whole city centre.
We're Channel 4 News.
Load of bloody rubbish, just load of bloody rubbish.
Why do you say that?
Well, because you're not going to get nothing out of it. You won't get a thing out of it.
Having Greta Thunberg lead your climate strike rally is obviously a huge coup for the organisers here. And it comes just a day after, of course, another very big moment for environmental campaigners.
So, what did you write down? Hopefully some of the following: that there was a voiceover or a commentary, there was a soundbite, there were vox pops, there was the use of mobile footage, different types of shots, different locations, and a piece to camera. So if you hadn't planned and hadn't gone through the process of thinking what you needed for your film, what would your result have been? Probably not an interview setup, maybe not the right pictures. You might not have been in the right location if you hadn't worked out where the geography and where you needed to set up your camera and the shots you could take. Maybe it wasn't possible to do a piece to camera because it was a live demonstration going on. So storytelling is about this process, about getting things right. And if you find the best locations, the people to interview, if you set up everything beforehand and realize if you can do it, then you will get it right and it will work. And that's what we're really trying to do all the time. So it's not just simply going out like there at a demonstration, live demonstration, and shooting whatever you see blindly without thinking about what you're going to script, what you need to cover, and coming back and seeing, can you edit it? It's actually knowing beforehand. So, finding your story. Where do you find your stories? Well, if you're looking for a specific sector, of course, it's much easier if you're working in a business team, on sport, entertainment, science, education. Then, of course, the stories are very obvious in terms of you will be monitoring them anyway. You know your subject matter. Otherwise, where do you look for one? Well, it's pretty obvious: online, talking to people, newspapers, press releases, word of mouth, and following your nose. Some of the best stories come from those very small little news in brief bits in a newspaper. And that's my experience. Is one of my biggest documentaries I ever made was a 4-line piece in The Guardian about people on the test island of Mururoa for French nuclear testing, is that they were being flown secretly to Paris to look after their cancers that they'd got. And I don't know why, but I followed it up, and 18 months later I'd filmed it secretly in Paris, people arriving. I'd been out to Tahiti to film with Greenpeace and followed back the families and the cases of abnormal children being born. And that was all the result of 4 lines in a little nibs, a news in brief piece. And it won awards and was a very satisfactory thing to do. So keep your eyes open for things that might interest you. Tear out pieces of paper, write things down, store things in some way, and hopefully you will come up with a kind of report that you want to do. Remember the so what factor. Well, that's what you have to ask yourself, these questions, when you're choosing a story. So I call them the W questions. Why is it so important? Why is it happening now? Why do you feel that it's worthwhile? Why does it matter? And why should people be interested or concerned? Of course, it doesn't end there. Once you've found your story, you have to ask yourself even more questions. What kind of story is it? Is it a new story? Is it a twist on an old story? Which is a different element, a different angle that you can bring to it? Is it a running story, which is like coronavirus and needs constantly updating, and you've got something else to add to it, a new person to interview or a new element? Is it investigative? all sorts of different types of stories, and that you need to know what sort of story you're producing to help with your focus and with your research, of course. And remember, the laws of research are: never assume anything, question everything, because that's your role as a journalist, and check everything, not once but twice, especially anything that you find on the internet or on Wikipedia or on BuzzFeed or wherever you're looking for your research. And what's the reason for that is your story has to be watertight, because otherwise you or the company you're working for can be sued and you can get yourself into trouble. There are lots of legal and ethical issues and guidelines that you have to think about, and hopefully you will be told about when you film or before you film. How you film people, have you got the consent, and the language that you use, the questions or the responses that you get. So you have to be aware of so many other things. And of course, once you've got to this stage, you might have decided your story yourself, but you might still have to pitch it at a news conference or to a news editor in order to get it commissioned, in order to be able to go out and actually film it. So pitching is an art in itself. And remember the single sentence that I talked about, being able to say the most interesting fact about yourself. Well, you have to have the top line and what the film is about in one sentence when you try and sell it. You also have to know the peg, so the reason and a date and why it has to go out at a certain time, or why at all, the different elements, the fact that you can do it in the time needed, so if it's a day turnaround or for the end of the week, and that you have checked the resources and that it is possible. Of course, it doesn't end there, because once you've got your story accepted or you've decided on it, you've still got more research to do. You've got to call people who are going to interview. You've got to set up interview times. You've got to check their details, and you've got to ask them perhaps for suggestions of other people you might talk to. You've got to check out your locations, and you have to see if you get permissions to. You can't go and film in a shopping centre or in a royal park or on a railway station without permission. And you've got to make absolutely sure that you can get to all these places within the allotted time. So there's still lots more to do, and part of this process of storytelling and your research is that you keep developing, you keep finding new things, you keep following people's suggestions, so that what comes out in the end is the best of all worlds. You get to make the best film, which is really what you want to do. And then of course the fun starts, because before you go out, you not only have an idea in your head, but you should actually have in your hand a rough script, a draft script. And that script really is down to one thing, which is mathematics. There are 3 words per second in the spoken word. So when you're writing down your script, you have to time it. So if you look at this draft script on the slide, you'll see that everything is timed. And that gives you a good idea of how much you actually have to film. In fact, you have to film a lot more in terms of pictures. And if you want maybe 2 vox pops, you'll have to do 5 or 6 to get any good ones. The same with interview sound bites. The same with trying with your piece to camera, how many times you have to do that. So you'll have to shoot more than you think you need. But it's about a 8-to-1, 10-to-1 ratio of what actually goes into your report. And then once you've got that script, of course, it's what you work to when you go out and film, and literally tick it off to make sure that you're getting everything when you're out there in the field. When you look at this slide, it makes you realize that words and pictures go together. So without having any words or caption, do you know what this picture says? Is it about the consumption of beer, the price of beer going up, a new budget with a hike on alcoholism prices? So remember that when you're writing your script, that's how the words and pictures go together. So going back to your rough script, the easiest way to set one up is to do a text box on your computer and then just fill it in with your 3 columns. So you've got your commentary, your pictures, and your timing. And whether you use or put the words or the pictures first is really up to you and how your brain works. Some people think very visually first, so you can immediately think of your opening shot. Other people think of the opening sentence and then add the picture. So whichever way works for you, do it that way and start assembling and writing your story, and of course timing it. That's the most important thing. And then really you're almost all set. You just have to check everything again, not only your equipment and what you're taking out, but also that you've got all the elements that you need, you're organized for. So maybe you're going to meet interviewees or out there, or maybe you're going to record them on your mobile or your camera, in which case you have to organize for when that's being done. And you have to have written out and thought about the questions, because of course you don't want just a yes or no answer from them. You want a proper soundbite that you can use, and you have a rough idea of what you think they're going to say and what you want them to say. And also with your piece to camera, always write it out beforehand. Don't try and busk it and just stand there, because the words won't come and you will have had to time them as well. So all about logistics. Have you got the time to do it? Have you mapped out your journey, how you're getting from A to B? Are you going by car? Are you going by public transport? Will it all work? And then just go out there and have fun, and hopefully you'll come out with a very good film at the end, which you'll bring back, and the editing starts, which of course is a totally new process, which I'm not going to talk to you about right now. So very good to have spoken to you, and enjoy your time as a video journalist or mobile journalist. It's a wonderful creative process, and you'll get better at it as you go on and as you repeat it. So enjoy.
Thank you very much, Vivian, for that. That was a pre-recorded one. So all of these sessions will be going onto the RTS YouTube channel over the next couple of days. So thank you very much. We'll get straight on to the second part, our second masterclass from Toby Sadler. Please do keep on sending in your questions. We've had a few in so far, which is great. Send some more in when they pop into your mind. So Toby will be going through a mini masterclass on getting the best out of your mobile phone. Take it away.
Thank you very much. So I have the words of Vivian resting on my shoulders. Don't busk it, practice it. We'll see which version turns out the best. So the point of this session is really to rattle through what normally takes 2 to 5 days of training in about 20 minutes to give you as much information as possible to get you guys up and running with your smartphones and trying to get as much out of them as you possibly can. I've got more technology in here than I know what to do with, so we'll start and see if we can get some of that up to you and work my way through it. So, introduction to smartphone filmmaking. Quick bit about me. I'm a TV reporter, so obviously egotistically I need my pictures on the screen for this section. But the point is, I've been a journalist for 20 years. I went from producing to reporting because I could self-shoot. And then for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been really focusing on smartphones and making that work as best as possible. And using that to teach journalists, but also people in business, marketing, PR, all sorts of people using video to tell their stories. So let's jump in with a few sort of technical bits. First of all, I'm going to come in with, I say camera 3, which has just gone black for me. Typical bit of studio production. Here we go. And let me bring that up and take you through the basic kind of operations of the camera. Now, this is an iPhone. The logic is the same, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android camera. And what I'm avoiding in this session is delving right into the settings, so things like resolutions, frame rates, that sort of stuff, because I think that will be a distraction for this. let's talk about just basic construction of shots. So look, here's the camera when it opens up on the iPhone. You can see it's opened up in photo mode. That's its default position. And so if I switch to video mode, you can just see, check the framing first of all. Of course, that changes dramatically from photo to video. So make sure when you're setting up your shots, you're doing that in video. Now in this auto mode, this is an Apple product. So it's looking for faces. It wants to find faces so that I can have a folder of these guys later on, which I will have forgotten when I took these shots. But we will always want to take more creative control. So if I tap on the screen here, you can see we go and we get this little yellow square pops up on the screen. And whenever I tap, that's where the camera both focuses and exposes. So if I tap on the front, I'm not entirely sure which beetle this is on the front, I'm afraid, but I tap on the back and you see it changes. Now what we can also do is we can adjust the exposure. So can you see on that square, there's a little sun has appeared. So if I tap to focus, I can now slide my finger anywhere on the screen and you can make that lighter and darker. So I could say, well, look, the exposure, I want to focus on the front, but expose to the back, and I can do that and slide it up and down. Now, the top tip really here is to try and lock both the focus and exposure so you've got much more control over your shots. And all you do for that very simply is you hold your finger on the screen for about 2 seconds. In my experience, it's just when you think it's not going to work, it starts to work. And you can see that on the top of the screen, we've now got that AF lock has come up. Auto exposure, auto focus lock. Now when I slide my finger up the screen, it will stay wherever I leave it. And if I take the beetles out for a second, you'll see that the focus hasn't jumped to the back. And if I put the beetles back in again, they still remain in focus. So to be clear, it's not tracking them, it's just the distance from the camera to the object. That's what it's doing. This works in both in the video modes and in photo modes, and it will change your photography and videography dramatically if this is not something you're already doing. The other settings within here, or the other options within here, I'm not going to go into in depth, but just so you know, you've got slow-mo in here, and you've got time lapse in here. Ooh, it's all gone a bit bananas. And time lapse in here as well. And look, my advice to you when you're using those functions is to use them for sort of, I'd say, editorial reasons. If you need to use slow-mo, then great, use it for a reason. Part of that storytelling that Vivian's been telling us about, how can it help the viewer understand what you're talking about? All right, let's move on, as time is always against us with these things, and I'll give you a few pointers as to where you can go and what you should do before you start shooting. So let's look at this. Before you start, charge your battery. Now this shouldn't be too much of a revelation to you, but it is one of the things that will fundamentally undermine your entire production. And video kills smartphone batteries, particularly in cold weather. Be really aware of that. And it's really important, I'd say, have something like this, an extra battery with you. I think they do come smaller than that. So you can charge up your device as you need to. So next one is going to be storage. Similar logic, but you've got to get it right. We've all been there when our devices said, "Oh, no more storage. Delete some clips." Between 3 and 5 gigabytes, I think it's fine if you're shooting HD. Be aware that 4K footage, this ultra high resolution footage, will take a lot more storage from your phone. And the last one here. Clean your lens. This is, again, it sounds really straightforward, but basically, if you think about your phone, it's in your pocket, it's against your face, it's just collecting filth and scum all day long. And so just getting a proper cloth, or even just your shirt in there, will make a big difference to bring your footage, from sort of 1970s news up to the current days. Get rid of that film off your phone. So a couple of more little pointers here. So aspect ratio. This is a bone of contention for every modern filmmaker, and there are people who will go to their graves saying one is right and one is wrong. And the truth is that, well, the truth is, because I'm the only one who knows, the truth is that it doesn't really matter. What matters is where your film's going. So if I'm out all day shooting Instagram stories, that's how I'm going to do it. For most of my personal social media, that's how I'm going to do it. If I'm doing a piece for ITV or Channel 5, that's how I'm going to do it. And if I want as much flexibility, that's how I'm going to do it. So think ahead. Part of this planning process is the story planning, but it's also the logistics planning as well, to make sure all that's going to work for you as best as it possibly can. So other little pointers here. we've got our holding our shots. Now what this means is that we need to have our, the shots that we record in video need to be long enough that we can edit with them. And I'm just going to drink a glass of water. So sounds like I'm drowning, just because I'm not drowning. So the key part of this here is to have enough shots, length of shots that you can edit with. Now, if you treat this a bit like shooting still photography, you end up with 2-3 second shots, and they're impossible to edit with. There's just not enough of them, and they haven't recorded enough audio which you can use to finesse your edit, which I'll just touch on later on, so that will become a little more clear. And the last thing here, airplane mode. It's a telephone. I'm not very popular, but when I'm doing an interview, that's when my mum phones. Turn your phone to airplane mode or do not disturb. The combination of those two will get you up and running. So that's your kind of your basics. What I want to do now very quickly is just to jump over onto an iPad screen I've got here. I wanted to just show you what an edit looks like. And I know for some of you guys who've started making films, this will be a bit grandma sucking eggs and all that stuff. But for others of you who've never seen it, it will really help when we start using vocabulary like cutaways and that sort of stuff to make it clear. So let me just jump onto that for you a second and play a bit of this. So here we have, again, a video of me. It's all about me. And you can see on the screen here, there's a line on the screen where my blue dot is, and that's my interview. That's me talking. And can you see above that, this graphic appears. So anything that appears above this line, that's what the person at home will see first. So as I scroll along here, we go to the graphics appearing, there's a gap there, and then we get some shots of Trafalgar Square. And as we go along, there's another gap coming up where it drops back to me, there we go, and then there's a bit more of the shots. So when we talk about structuring an edit, this is the most simple version you can do. I am going to play it to you. It's only about a minute long. I apologize for a couple of dad jokes in there. You know, I'm a dad, it's the way it is. So here we go. Okay, welcome to what is going to be possibly the worst tour of Trafalgar Square you've ever heard, but hopefully will help you understand the edit process a bit better. So there's me, the interviewee, the tour guide in this case. I'll be talking about Trafalgar Square itself. So built to commemorate the Battle of Trafalgar, I guess. We've got Lord Nelson atop his column. Around the column, we've got some lions and some tourists enjoying a day out. Then we've also got many, many fountains. I know nothing about those, but they were obviously, Nelson was a big fan of the fountain. I don't know. Then we've got the fourth plinth. So Trafalgar Square famous for all its artwork as well. So on the fourth plinth, a rotating piece of artwork, i.e. they change it, it doesn't spin around. And we've also got the National Gallery, and around the corner the Portrait Gallery, many, many great paintings in there. So that's all you need, hopefully, to put the structure of a film together. I'm now going to get the shots of the things I've spoken about. The point of that film is to really make it as simple as possible, just to show you the building blocks of that edit. And that's kind of where you're going to start. But also, I hope you noticed that whenever I talked about anything in that tour, if you like, there were always 2 or at least 3 shots of that thing. And that's how we start to create sequences with our phones. And it's really important that we get that variety, wide shots, medium shots, and close-up shots, which thankfully brings me on to this next couple of slides here, which is exactly that. It's a simple concept. We wides, mediums, and close-up shots. Now, professional camera operators will have about 15 different variants in between all of these, but for us mere mortals, that's what we need to mix these up to make the production as interesting visually as possible. The one thing we don't want to do, of course, with the mobile phone is that we do not zoom. And the reason for that is because you get this horrible pixelation of the image. So what we do is there's this terrible phrase, zoom with our feet. And all that means is you have to move closer, but also by moving closer with this camera, it means that you see other shots, you see more possibilities. So it's actually a very creative way to shoot your films. But if you zoom, you pinch on the screen, I know it's very tempting to do it, the quality of your film will tank from day one, which is not a good position to be in. So a simple sequence. This is my wife who very kindly spoke very excitedly about our Nespresso machine. I believe her views are honestly held.
This machine has absolutely changed my life. I drink loads more coffee than I ever used to, and it's really decent. is such an easy way to make coffee with an espresso machine. You simply take the capsule, pop it in the machine, and in a matter of seconds, you have a really lovely cup of coffee. Even my 8-year-old daughter can make me coffee.
I mean, I believe her. But can you see in that, although it's the most mundane of possible films you can make, even by using these variety of shots to create a sequence of shots, a variety of shots, it makes it much more interesting for the viewer. So really important that you realize that when you're filming. But those close-up shots, if you're new to filmmaking, you have to be pretty close. And so if you're filming people you've not met before, then part of your filmmaking skill set, if you like, is going to be negotiating that space between you and the person you're filming. Okay, let's move on quickly then to audio, because audio is fundamental. Now, you'll find that there are endless stats online. 80% of films on social media are watched without sound, but that means that 20% of them are being listened to. And also within news, of course, broadcast news, people will be listening to your reports. So important to get this stuff right. Now, a couple of pointers for you on audio. Just checking my microphone's on. There's not a bit of irony here. So before recording, listen to the environment in which you are in. Sounds simple, right? But the trouble is that there are so many sounds that we just tune out. Air conditioning, fans on PCs, anything like that. So when you've identified that sound, try and turn it off where possible. If you can't turn it off, then context is important. So either you put the thing that's making the noise in the back of shot, great, roadworks on the street, for example, as long as they're far enough back, then the person watching that footage can see the roadworks, and as if they were standing in front of that person, they can filter it out. Or worst case, you have to use do that sort of thing where you say, oh, well, I hope you can hear me over the roadworks. And again, that has the same effect of helping to tune out the noise. And the last thing, frankly, is move. And it's not the most sophisticated advice, but if the sound is ruining your shoot, you have to get out of there. So how do we get good sound? Microphones. Rarely do I use a microphone like that, but that is a handheld microphone that does attach straight into the phone. Our first port of call, of course, is here, the built-in microphone. Now, the advice really has always been, don't use a built-in microphone because it is terrible. It's getting much, much better. So there are sort of occasions where you can use it. I'll play you a little clip in a second of how it sounds, but that's your first port of call. But really, for interviews, I want you to be at least going down this road. The lapel, lavalier, clip mic, they are all the same thing. And of course, you'll see endless iPhone trainers like me waving these things at people, which of course are the headphone sets that used to come with phones. I'm not sure they even do anymore, but that hands-free kit isn't a bad microphone to kick you off. So if you've got that and nothing else, you'll be on to a winner. So start with that. And then the other sort we use are these condenser microphones, a little bit more directional. You don't really want to be more than about a meter away from somebody when you're using that. But here's another opportunity to see me looking very sincere about something. So let's have a listen to me talking microphones. So this is the onboard microphone, just a simple test of that. It's a reasonably quiet street. It's not too windy. So you'll probably find this microphone is okay if you're really close, but always best to use an external microphone if you can. So now just over a meter away, I'm sure you can still hear me, but the quality of the audio is going down. A lot more of the wind noise and street noise will be coming in and getting in the way of the person you're interviewing. Okay, so next up we have a lapel microphone, this sort of thing here, which I've just clipped onto my shirt here. Normally I'd have the cable inside so you wouldn't see it. And this is the preferred choice for an interview. I can go as far away as I've got cable from the camera. So here I've got a really long cable, so I can go all the way back over there. So this is how it sounds. It should sound the same as it did when I was close to the camera. I can get as far away as the cable allows. In this case, it's a 6-meter cable. I appreciate that's a little bit like a very poor quality episode of QVC, but it does at least give you a sense of what the microphones are and how they can be used. And those are your kind of entry-level options. Of course, you can go down the radio mic road. You can get professional shotgun mics. You can wire all those into smartphones. And if you want to go down that road, then do the research before you buy. And certainly if you guys want to get in contact with me, I'm happy to give you a few pointers on that. The next thing I need to tell you is I think without doubt the fundamentally most boring thing you're going to learn in this entire session, but it also comes under really fundamental. Okay, so it's tedious, but important. So it is this. It is the TRS versus TRRS issue. And the reason it's important is because if you look at the mic jack on the left, it's got 2 black stripes on it. And if you look at the mic jack on the right, it has 3 black stripes on it. If you want a microphone to go into your smartphone and work, it has to have the 3 black stripes, or you'll need an adapter to make it work. I know many professional broadcasters who've taken microphones away and blamed the microphone when all they did is have the wrong cable, or in fact, have the cable in backwards. So as I say, massively boring, but if you get it wrong, you have no sound, which is, well, that's upsetting. So let's rattle on quickly to lighting before Ed rises up and kicks me off. So lighting, as important as audio, of course, it's photography at the end of the day. So without lighting, we can't see what we're doing. And so, again, a couple of things before we start filming. Let's have a go through these. So looking around, obvious, right? But so many times you see people forgetting to see where the light's coming from, and they put the light in the wrong direction. Ideally, you want the light lighting the thing you're talking about or talking to, not the other way around. Is there natural light you can use? Great, window light, perfect. That's the one to look for, but is it too strong? Do we need to go somewhere else to seek shade? Artificial light, now, that's two-pronged there. Artificial light within the space you're in, you know, that could be good or it could be bad. Or if the lighting is bad, do we need to bring lights with us? You know, 5:30 on a January afternoon, you're going to need some lights if you want to film indoors, okay? And then, again, my top tip, just move if it's not working for you. So here's the kind of classic window situation, often seen in Skype calls, particularly in lockdown. The iPhone cannot cope, or the smartphone cannot cope with this kind of level of exposure. In fact, no camera can, without a lot of light on my face. So simply turning 180 degrees round, you get this. I mean, the expression on my face is not related to the lighting. So that to that, just by twisting around, is pretty fundamental. Even outside, you need to be really aware of the lighting. So this is just me standing in the street, turning 180 or 360 degrees, about 4:30 in the afternoon, and look at the sun moving across my face, how the shadows move, how the exposure moves, how more or less sweaty I look, and you know how much squinting I'm doing. There's a lot of compromise when you're filming outside, and a lot of people think, great, sunshine, let's get out there. For me, if I'm interviewing somebody in these conditions, I just do this. Take both the interview and the background into the shade, and you can see how much different that is. And that's just 2 meters away from where I was standing before. So, you know, have the confidence to take an interviewee into better lighting. Last thing, really on light, I'm going to show you something really quickly on the iPad, just because I think this is going to be worthwhile for you. The thing with lighting is that lots of us travel without lights, and so we say, oh, well, we don't want to use lights, we want to use natural light. That's our preferred choice. But you can do so much with so little with LED lighting. So if I just bring up the screen here, that's not the screen, but that is the screen, and I bring up this little comparison we've got here. So look, there's my landing. Terrible lighting, I think you'll agree. This is 3-point lighting. It's over the top, it's 3 lights, it's on stands, and it looks much better, I agree, but it requires this, a key light, fill light, and a backlight. So a lot of effort, a lot of light stands, and not mobile filmmaking. This light though, the Ulanzi VL49, is this light. And so this is doing that shot, compared to the 3 lights for the 3-point lighting. I think you'll agree that's where we started. That one single LED light makes a massive, massive difference. So get something, I'd say, for interviews, and even for GV shots, general view shots, something just to raise the quality of your footage. And the final thing I'm going to actually do is I actually want to play a clip, which will have me then finished off. If I can get myself back to, come on, there you go. So what I'm going to do is just play this clip, because hopefully when these are all the DIY stands I was going to talk to you about, but we'll rattle through all that, and this is where I want to get you to. So if you've applied everything I've said in terms of framing, lighting, audio, you can make a piece like this, which is a piece I made for Channel 5 News just a couple of weeks ago, shot on the iPhone, edited on the iPad. Here you go. If coronavirus was a film, it would not be suitable for children. And yet our kids are watching this real life and death saga unfold every day.
And so how do you feel about the virus?
I hope my nana doesn't die from it because she's already ill and she's old.
But the worries of my 5-year-old daughter are not shared by her 8-year-old sister.
Well, I think actually adults are more worried than children because adults are the ones that are like buying in lots of things, and the children they're not really like trying to persuade their parents to like do that.
As you think the biggest thing is the stockpiling and
Yeah.
panic buying.
Because we can't find any toilet roll anywhere.
That is a big concern.
My daughters are like the rest of the population. Some need more support than others. And so it is that Childline says it's been swamped by calls. They've had more than 900 related to coronavirus, most since the schools closed. Emma Motherwell from the NSPCC has been helping to take the calls.
Dealing with the isolation from other people, worries about getting ill or other family members getting ill. For some, there's family squabbles and arguments that are impacting now that the families are closer together.
The charity advises children keep as much contact with friends as possible. My daughters, for example, are now video conference experts.
I would like it if I was in the same room as someone, doing the drawing with them, but I look forward to it quite a lot.
I hijacked the chat today where Jack told me his family sometimes overshare the news.
They just say like how many cases and deaths. Yeah, my brother does it too.
The NSPCC's advice to all parents is to be vigilant, look out for changes in eating, sleeping and emotions, and then keep the lines of communication open. Toby Sadler, 5 News. So there we go. Apologies for the rapid speed through that, but I wanted to get as much to you as possible. Ed, I rest.
Thank you very much. That was great. Right, let's move straight on to the Q&A section. We've got time for about half an hour of that, assuming nobody needs to rush off anywhere. I want to start with Dougal. I realised that I haven't really introduced you. You've all demonstrated your credentials quite comprehensively, but I haven't told anyone who you are. So let's quickly run through that. So obviously Vivian, we heard from first. Vivian is a reporter, producer, director and presenter. You've worked on Panorama, Channel 4 News, CNN and elsewhere. You're also a media trainer, as evidenced. And you've written a number of books on mobile phone journalism, including the most recent one, Video Journalism, History, Pioneers, Theory and Practice, which I think we've covered all off here now. And that's on Amazon. And then we've got Toby, who again we've just heard from, also a journalist and media trainer, and the Smartphone Shooter, which is your training school for smartphone journalism. And now I want to come to Dougal Shaw, who's joined us. He's a video journalist for the BBC, working across BBC Business and BBC News, and you're something of a pioneer when it comes to mobile journalism, I understand. But I wanted to start by saying, we've talked a lot over these past 2 sessions about how we do this. What's the benefit of filming on your phone versus filming not on your phone, filming on a traditional camera?
Can I start?
Yes, please.
When I started using the phone for filming my news reports I was making, so this was back in 2015, which is roughly the time when the most smartphones had the ability to film HD. The big motivation for me, apart from thinking, well, it's a nice, experimental thing to try, do something different, was just purely practical. Because when you go out doing news stories as a video journalist like myself, you're often going out as just one person. So if you imagine with a normal camera, even though they've got smaller over the years, it's like you're going on holiday. You've got a huge, usually it's a trolley case that you've got to wheel around with you. Then on top of that, you've got the tripod bag, which is actually probably just as heavy, cutting into your shoulder, so that when you actually get to a story on location, you've got to you're just not very nimble at all. You've got to kind of try and move around, and you feel very loaded down, very cumbersome. So I was always jealous of radio journalists who might just have one little backpack or something like that, and they can get around, nip between different places for interviews, if something starts to happen that's a bit surprising, go off and have a look at that and record it. And I felt I couldn't do that with a normal camera kit. So that's one of the big reasons why I switched to using the smartphone instead. And then the thing I realized almost accidentally after that original motivation was that in many ways you get better interviews from people, because they're not, when they see the big cameras, they're a bit scared, a bit intimidated, especially if they're not used to doing media interviews, and most of the people I interview aren't. But with the camera, it was just way more relaxed. It's this very small object that they're familiar with, and the whole process of filming somebody felt quite natural. So for me, it's about practicalities, so that you're much more nimble, but then also this kind of natural way of filming that seems to allow people to open up a lot more.
And in terms of sorry, do you want to come in, Vivian?
Oh, just to say that I take what you say, and it's the new technology, the new thing, Dougal, but actually I do question a lot of the time, by the time you've added all the things to the mobile phone, you've actually got the same weight as a camera. And sometimes I think these, either using SLR camera as well, but that's, you know, you might as well use a proper camera with much better lenses. So there's an argument for keeping to cameras as well, and maybe having the mobile as your backup.
Well, that's something that I wanted to come to, is what are the limitations of this? You know, we talked about, you know, you've got to use your feet to zoom, but actually, can you create a product that's as good on a mobile phone versus on a broadcast camera?
In terms of like news output, I can tell you that people don't notice a difference. Back like 5 years ago, when I was first sending the the reports to different programs saying, do you want to run this story, I sort of felt like I should say to them a little note saying, by the way, I filmed this on my phone, maybe the presenter needs to mention that before it goes out. And then after a while, they did run on the news channel, on Breakfast TV, BBC One, and they didn't need to say that, and they never did. So to them, especially in news where it's a really fast turnover, they don't care. They just want good stories to put out. And it's like saying to them, this was shot on a Canon, this one was shot on a Sony. They've got no interest as long as it looks good. And from that point of view, I think you'd have to be someone who knows filming very, very well to notice that that was probably shot on a smartphone. But in terms of the average viewer, you're not really going to tell the difference if it's done well.
I think also it's in terms of access for the whole world, and people who can't afford cameras, and you've got mobiles, is that we're getting footage that we wouldn't otherwise get because they're shooting it on their mobiles. So we're seeing a lot of events now that we would never have seen otherwise, whether it's demonstrations, tsunamis, or whatever. So I think it's expanding the news coverage, which is what the small video cameras did in the first place when we started out as pioneers. So I think there's that element to it as well. But so I think the arguments work both ways in terms of finance costs and who can afford what and where they are.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of, you know, sort of the point that you were speaking to a moment ago, with the extra kit that you need, you know, I think, Toby, you covered this sort of quite comprehensively in your presentation. What is the bare minimum that you need to get, you know, if you're attending this and you want to start making stuff, but you haven't got 500 quid to blow on expensive equipment, what do you need?
Look, for me, the bare minimum is the phone. I mean, I've seen plenty of stuff shot in lockdown on mobile phones that I think, echoing what Dougal says, people wouldn't even known that it was on a mobile phone. You know, yes, there's an issue with sound. You have to be close if you're just using that onboard microphone. For me, that I would like to go one up from that. I'll probably use something a bit like this kind of thing, at least just a grip, just so I've got a bit of more of a substantial hold on it, and ideally a microphone. So, you know, those little what do we talk about, those condenser microphones, like the one I was waving at you, you know, this attached to my phone like that, I'm in a really strong position to get, you know, interviews and good quality pictures much more rapidly than if I had to wait for a film crew to turn up. And I'm not anti good quality cameras, but it really does have its place, and it can produce images that no one would know it was a smartphone.
You were asking about.
I know Dougal has a good rig, so I don't know whether he has a good pointers on what he would bring.
Yeah, annoyingly, my rig is 'cause I've been at home obviously with coronavirus around lockdown. So my beloved kit, is in BBC HQ. So I'm actually planning to cycle in tomorrow to go and be reunited with it and bring it back. So I haven't got my rig here, but yeah, I do. I use one, just a kind of plastic thing with two handles to hold it steady. What I found basically was that space in my bag was like a massive premium, and I'm always trying to get rid of things to make things lighter and lighter. So in the beginning, I thought a tripod would be very important, and I had a small, compact tripod, plastic one, because it doesn't have to be so strong to hold the mobile phone because it's lighter, it would fold down small enough to go in a rucksack. But in the end, I realized actually I can get steady enough shots by just holding the phone in my little plastic handheld rig. And because the phone is quite light, I can hold it quite steady easily. Even if I'm interviewing someone for 5 minutes, the bits I need, it will be quite a steady shot. And the other option I have is that not other, we call this like mojo, mobile journalism. A lot of people who do that will also edit on their phones. I actually do most of my editing on a MacBook on Final Cut, and you can further stabilize the shots with that. So that gave me a kind of second option, but usually I didn't have to use that. And so it was fine even not using the tripod. But when I go out filming, the big practical problem I have, and it happens probably about half the time, is battery life. Everyone thinks it's going to be about not having enough memory storage for the filming. But, you know, I've got an iPhone 8 with, I think it's about 64 gig, maybe, I don't know off the top of my head, but I've never ever run out of storage space. But I quite often get very close to the limit on my battery, because my phone's a year old now, and I'm not going to get, you know, realistically a new phone every year with brilliant battery life. So what I do is when I see it, I always obviously start filming when it's on 100%. But if I'm filming on location for a whole day, I might find that the battery is getting down to about 15%, 10%. And at that point, I will stop, because problems can start to happen very quickly. And the software that I use for filming will, like this, you might carry on filming, but the sound might die, or basically strange things start to happen. So when it gets below 15% on the battery, I keep a backup phone. I keep my old iPhone 6 fully charged, and I switch to that instead. Because obviously with a phone, one drawback is you can't just switch over some fresh batteries. And then the only other thing I can do is I bring my MacBook, which is quite a good way of quickly recharging the phone. So if you're maybe driving between locations or between interviews, I can increase the power levels a bit. Or I have a few power chargers as well to do that. But or I just, in someone's car, I might say, if you've got a charger, or in a taxi, if you've got a charger, can I just charge up my phone a bit while we travel? And that's a kind of, in terms of your filming, that's a life and death thing, because you could be in the middle of a brilliant interview where someone's giving a really emotional answer they're not going to repeat again, and your battery could suddenly go.
Yeah, well, on one of the points that you were making there regarding software that you use, I'd be interested to hear from you guys. Is the camera in your phone, native, as it were, adequate, or should people get apps and different things installed on their phone to make this work for them?
I think for me, it depends on what you're filming for. I think if you're filming for broadcast, then a lot of newsrooms require you to be shooting in either 25 frames per second or 50 frames per second, depending on the system they've got. I find at ITN, they just say, oh, just stick it onto the server and it'll be fine. And it kind of is. So I'm not sure why that seems to work there, but not other places. And the trouble with these iPhones and smartphones is they're all based on the American system, NTSC versus PAL. So it's 30 frames per second versus 25 frames per second. So the split for me is all my own personal social media. I do a lot of it just on the native app. It does a lot of great stuff, instant, quick shots. And if I'm doing anything more considered, then the app I use is Filmic Pro, which I think a lot of people use, where you can adjust frame rate and resolution, and you can listen to your audio and you can adjust your audio. And certainly if you're going to be doing serious filmmaking, then I would recommend using that app. But there are other ones around, there's Movie Pro and a few others as well. But those are certainly my tips on it.
Yeah. We've had a few questions in. Shall we start making some headway through those? Because there have been quite a lot. So you know, you're all professional journalists. Starting out, how would you begin by, you know, to approach broadcasters about covering a story?
I've just been trying to answer that to somebody who wants to know. And I said, well, if you've got unique footage, there's addresses on both BBC and ITV about where you could send something in if you had something, for example, covering a demonstration and an angle and footage other people didn't have. Otherwise, it's very difficult to just send in a story or story idea without going through a production company or being part of a news team. So I think that's one of the problems about wanting to be a journalist is where do you start and where do you get an internship, and do you go to somewhere like the Media Trust or RTS Futures or wherever that you can get a sort of a leg up really and start finding out and working in one of the companies. But competitive and not always easy to get started, really.
One thing I would say is that these days, obviously now anybody can publish videos. You can publish them obviously on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, whatever platforms. And obviously I appreciate you're not necessarily getting money paid from that. But what I do know from taking part in some job interviews and things like that that I've seen in media organizations is if you can say to people, you know, here's a video that I made it myself, the story was my idea, and look, it had 300,000 views, it went viral, look at all these comments. That's going to be something that really makes you stand out in an interview. So if you can just go out there and do some stories, and you should be sort of practicing anyway and improving your craft, and you can get them up there on social media and try and give them a push. If you can find some success that way, you might find that opens doors for you.
So I'd echo that. I mean, in terms of what Doug was saying with practice, the thing with this is you literally have to just practice, and if you can do it every day, even if you make a little film about making coffee or your commute or whatever it is, so that you're filming stuff, you're going through like a workflow of ingesting footage into an editing software and then exporting that out. You know, every time you do that, you'll make a different mistake, and then you'll make fewer and fewer mistakes, and eventually you'll make, you know, the sort of mistakes I make, which is occasional. I wouldn't want to rule them out completely. And then also, the thing with digital now is that it's leading so many agendas within newsrooms. So we're in a sort of weird position where I come from a traditional background, and the way I shoot is actually quite traditional. But I look at YouTube, I look at Instagram, I get real inspiration from these kind of, I mean, not to be patronizing, kids, you know, 14, 15-year-old kids who are making amazing films because they've somehow worked out how to gaffer tape their phone to the bottom of a skateboard. And you think, wow, I would never have thought of that in a million years. So, you know, watch other people's stuff, take inspiration from it, and also look, enjoy it. You know, film with a smile, make it a passion for you. Because if it becomes like learning Excel, then you're never going to learn it. You know, get out there and really enjoy it and have fun with it, and experiment, particularly in the beginning when you can just try it and do what you want. Because as Dougal says, the barrier for entry is very low in terms of cost and experience.
In terms of news as well, possibly it's changing a bit, but what you find is that actually there's not that many people in news organizations who can be a shoot edit, who can film and edit, produce their own stories. If you're able to get in a position where you can do that, then you're a bit of a kind of ninja who's in a very strong position. And that's one of the reasons why I learned to film and edit in the first place, because I was bursting with ideas. But if you're in a media organization or a documentary company or something, people aren't going to give you a chance. They're not going to trust your ideas at the beginning. They're not going to give you resources and say, oh, this new guy's wants to do this story. We'll give him some editing time. You can go out with this camera crew. It's all very expensive. But if you can be self-sufficient, if you can do everything yourself, then even if you're not filming the whole thing yourself, you might produce a kind of taster video and say, this is the story I want to do, take a look at this, look at the potential. So having these skills opens the door for you. And even now when I see people, freelancers pitching ideas and commissioning, which is another way you can, you know, lots of bigger organizations use freelancers. In terms of digital commissions, there's fewer people pitching videos than written features, because, you know, the skill set to make a written feature is slightly more people have that skill set than the ability to go out, film, edit, do the whole package and send it in. So if you have those skills, that's very marketable.
We were only talking here about news, and I always say when I sort of go and talk at schools and do sort of various talks, is that actually every organization needs content and visual content and video content on their websites. And so wherever you work, you know, whatever it is, if it's, you know, the post office or, you know, a tire selling factory or ice cream company, they're all going to need those skills. And so that's a great way to learn and to start putting stuff up as well, because it shows that you've got those skills. So every PR agency, anyone who needs to fill their website. So I think that's also another starting point. It's not only news, which is, as I say, incredibly competitive, all the broadcast channels. So if you like filming, you can film for any company.
I train a lot of people who work in internal comms. I mean, that's a big growth market for video because people no longer want to get the email from the boss. They want to see their face and hear what they've got to say, and they're more likely to watch it than read a long, boring email.
A question that's come through that's sort of on the other side of that, rather than how to approach people to run a story, how to approach people to be in a story. How would you approach potential subjects for your story or mini documentary is the question.
Well, that's part of the research, really, is that if you know what your story is, you should be able to think of the kind of people. Do you need a psychiatrist? Do you need a nurse? Who do you need, the type of person you need, and then try and find them. So that's part of researching, really. And especially wherever your source is of your story, it often mentions names that you then have to follow up. So it really is a question of picking up the phone or texting people, emailing people, and approaching people. You've got to be proactive. It's something that lots of people find really difficult is actually asking people to be interviewed, you know, but it's vital. So you have to pick up your phone.
Why do you think it is that people struggle with that so much? Because that I think that is something that a lot of people find very difficult. Is there anything that you can just sort of reframe your thinking to be like, actually, most people are happy to be in stuff, and if they're not, they'll just say, and we'll begrudge you asking?
I think that it's a question of if there's a difference between are you going to record it on Skype? Now you can record on Zoom and other ways online. So actually you don't have to be out and about. You don't have to go and meet them in Leicester Square or on a street corner in a pub or whatever. So I think people are get confused by the fact that they're using mobiles. Can they do it online without moving? A lot of the influencers, for example, and a lot of the times when I work with students, they just email somebody online and then talk to them online and record it and do it that way. So there's no face-to-face contact. And I think people forget now in lockdown, we're in an artificial world, but I think a lot of people forget there's a real world out there that you can go to.
Well, sorry, come in, Dougal.
I was going to say that obviously there's lots of different kinds of interviews that you can do, but the really sort of basic one for a short news story is the vox pop, when it's just someone in the street giving an opinion. But it's quite interesting doing that with your smartphone rather than a big camera, because that's possibly one occasion where the smartphone can be a disadvantage, because when you're stopping people just walking past in the street and you say, oh, excuse me, do you want to, complete surprise, do you want to be in a BBC News story tonight? It's going to be on the 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news. And they see you with a little iPhone, they kind of think this guy's joking, he's like a vlogger or something. Whereas if you were there with a big camera and, you know, maybe you had a team of 3 people, they would take it more seriously. So that's one of the very few times where I sort of think it's not so good to have the mobile phone.
Vivian, you mentioned Zoom and Skype interviews and stuff. I'm interested to hear how all of you are dealing with lockdown and how you cope, you know, in terms of getting shots and filming and getting good sound, you know, not being able to put mics on people. How are you dealing with doing your job in this climate?
I could talk about that. So yeah, for me, I've managed to keep up quite a lot of output of stories, but two things I was able to film at home because it was about life in lockdown, and I used my phone for that. For everything else, it's been doing calls like this, video calls, and recording those calls. So as you've probably seen on TV, on most news programs, most interviews they're doing now, because they can't get people to go to TV studios, is kind of Skype calls or some kind of video call from the smartphone for a laptop, and that's just become kind of normal now. So I've recorded quite a few that way, and this obviously the sound isn't quite as good, the picture isn't quite as good, but for the most part, to tell the story you're trying to tell, it's okay. So that's been one thing. One other trick I can tell you, but this was a good way to get very good sound, because I also make radio pieces as well, is you can have a call like this, like we're doing now on Zoom or Skype, and you can just say to the other person, look, carry on talking, but can you get your phone out and open up voice memos or something similar, whatever app you have on your phone, and let's just carry on the conversation, but have the phone recording next to you. And so you might speak for 5 minutes doing an interview, and then you get them to email you that sound file later on. And from that, you get a much better, higher quality audio. You can't use it with the video, because obviously the video you're seeing them holding the phone. But if you're doing any kind of radio recordings, that's a good way to do it. Or you could ask them actually to have their phone out and maybe put a kind of headphones with the microphone on it in their pocket or something like that. So they're recording, you're doing a video call, but you're having a second audio recording in higher quality, which you could edit together back on your end. So there's a few tricks you can do to improve the sound. But yeah, for the time being, it's restricted. I'm going to start going out filming again soon, probably filming outdoors mostly rather than indoors, because that's a bit safer. There's lots of BBC guidelines about it, which I'll be following. But because not many people at the BBC do the Mojo filming as normal, the smartphone filming, I'll have to think about how I adapt my method. And I've been thinking about it, and probably what I'll do is I'll have my normal rig, but normally I'd be standing, I don't know, about 80 centimeters away from a person. It's quite a kind of normal distance, as if you're having a conversation, but now I need to go 2 meters back. So I'll probably I might film in 4K so that I can crop it in a bit in the edit. I'll use my ×2 lens, which I have on the iPhone 8. And in terms of sound, I use an external condenser microphone, which plugs in through an adapter to my iPhone's Lightning port. I might attach that to a kind of selfie stick so that I can hold it and kind of hover it underneath the person's, I don't know, round about their waist while I'm filming them from 2 meters. So I haven't done that yet, but I'm starting to think about how I can film with a smartphone in these social distancing conditions.
Yeah, I've had a couple of goes at the social distancing smartphone filming. I do much less than Dougal, but I was sent out on a ITV job, and kind of a combination of things that Dougal suggested. I had the 4K and the 2 times on the lens, but also I had a microphone on a lighting stand, which I then put next to them. I then retreated and did the filming there. But another way I kind of realized I could do it, that Filmic Pro app I mentioned has got an app called Filmic Remote, and you can pair it normally to Wi-Fi, but you can do a hotspot on your phone and essentially create a Wi-Fi hotspot, pair that. So you could put the camera at the right distance, if you like, usher the person in, and then adjust the exposure and settings and so on the phone at a safe distance, and press go. The trouble with it all, and the joy of the phone, is it's very immediate and nimble and spontaneous, and those interviews mean you can kind of really get some great answers. As soon as you start putting these kind of clunky bits of kit in the way, it just starts to ruin the interviews. And that's my problem with Zoom interviews. I mean, even now I'm looking directly into the lens of a camera, so I have to assume that I'm being the most fascinating I've ever been, and smile and all the rest of it. I get nothing back from anybody else, and that's, when you're doing an interview, particularly an emotional interview, is where you really have to just ride those questions and just pull back a little bit and go forward a little bit, really judge their emotions. And when there's a time delay, or you decide to do that emotional question, and somebody goes, oh, sorry, what was that? What was that? And you think, oh God, So it's difficult. But just some of the newsrooms I've worked for in lockdown have just gone for a full, we'll use crews, we'll use Zoom lenses, we'll use big microphones on sticks, and just make that work. So yeah, bit of a 50-50 for me.
I'm aware that we've got loads more questions and questions still coming in, but that we are sort of reaching our time. So I want to just go through some some quite quickly. And there's one from Karen C. wants to know, Toby, what software did you use to edit on your iPad? And you said, what do you use to edit on your MacDougall? Toby first.
So on my iPad, I used a thing called Luma Fusion, which costs, I think it's about 30 quid now. And for me, it can do most of what I would want to do on Final Cut or Premiere Pro. I can do it on the iPad. But that, the difference between me on Luma Fusion is I know 95% of Luma Fusion, I can use it. But that would equate to about 10% or 15% of the potential of Final Cut or Premiere Pro. So it means it's much easier to get to a good use level, if you like. If you want to go beyond, then I think probably a more high-end editing software. But actually, for what I do, and I can color grade and all the rest of it, Luma Fusion would be my choice. A free option for iOS would be Video Leap, I quite like. And then the best one on Android, I think what I use most is called KineMaster, K-I-N-E, like KineMaster, but pronounced KineMaster. And that works on Android and iOS. They have a free version, but has a tiny little watermark in the corner, but you can get started on that.
It's a very good one as well. That's I always get my students to use.
What was that?
Filmic Pro.
Filmic Pro.
Yeah, it's also, yeah, there's a free version as well as a more expensive one.
When I learned to edit, it was on Adobe Premiere, and then I switched to Final Cut just because at work that's what they wanted people to do, so people could share projects and things more easily. So I use Apple Final Cut 10 at the moment on my MacBook. The main reason I prefer to edit on the MacBook rather than on the phone, because there are really good editing apps on the phone, like Toby was saying, Luma Fusion is a good one, or even just iMovie as well for basic things, is that I spend such a long time editing, so I feel that editing is probably more important than the filming in terms of the overall quality of the piece. And I just didn't like the idea of doing it all on a small screen, very fiddly with my fingers on a touch screen. I wanted to do it on the bigger MacBook. And then there's a few practical things that the BBC has, like templates and stuff that are developed that would have been difficult to get it onto the mobile. But for me, that's the main reason. So Final Cut is very good, but to be honest, there's a lot of good editing software, and in principle, they basically do the same things. So just get learning on whichever one. And definitely, I would say, don't think of yourself as I'm just going to do filming and forget about the editing, or just be editing. If you can, do everything, because the two skills reinforce each other. You get much better at, like, my editing definitely got better from doing the filming because I made so many mistakes. I learned how to correct them in the edit. I learned lots of tricks to sort of, and then you get so annoyed having to fix those tricks, your filming improves because you don't want to make those mistakes because it's taking up all your time in the edit. So definitely the two reinforce each other, and I do both of them.
And I think you need to start with, I know we all started with Adobe and with those sort of slightly more complicated video ones, but there's so many simple ones like iMovie, as you said, which used to come for free, but there's one called Movavi as well, which is free, M-O-V-A-V-I. And I think if you're starting to edit, you should use one of those very simple ones, because that way, you just learn how to sort of build up sequences and add things and change your sound, and don't sort of jump in straight away to Final Cut. Is quite complicated, really.
I'm going to limit it to 3 more questions and some nice quick answers, so I don't want to keep you. I know you've all got busy lives to be stuck in your house doing. So start with, where should people start if they want to know a bit more about permissions, release forms, things that you need to get signed if you're going to vox pop people, for instance?
I did answer that one, and I said you can write it out on a piece of paper, it's legal, and just say, I agree that you can use my interview and get the person to sign it, and that is a legal bit. But there are forms that you can download online as well.
Just in terms of location-wise on that, I'd say, if you're on the highway, public highway, you are free to film, no matter what the security guards of buildings will tell you. But if you look at the pavement outside buildings, you'll see either the paving will change a kind of color or design, or there'll be a little thin bit of brass or some brass tacks, and you just need to step across that line to make sure you're on the public highway, in which case you're allowed to film pretty much anything. apart from royal parks where they will send the parks police to round you up.
Nobody wants that. We've had a question in a couple of times about where should you position the Ulanzi light that you showed us, Toby?
In that case, it was literally just a smack above the camera on the top of one of these. It's just boshed on like that. I would probably try and finesse it off to the side a little bit just for a bit of a different lighting. But yeah, that's all I did. And I only got them this week, so I've not used them in anger too much. But I was really impressed. Bearing in mind it cost 20 quid, and they've got like a cold shoe on the bottom. You can just bolt them together. So if you wanted to get two for a bit more lighting, then you could do it. So if you're gonna buy them, apparently there's a Ulanzi V49 1 and Mark II. So you want to make sure it's got a back that looks like that has all these buttons on rather than a dial on the side. I appreciate that's a bit niche, but I pass it on nonetheless.
Important advice. Okay, and then the last question for you all is, people have watched this, they've loved learning about mobile journalism, and they want to know more. Where should they go?
Buy my book.
Vivian's book, which is available
There's
on
a lot of, and there are a lot of things online as well if they want to look for it. But if you wanted to do a course, Media Trust as well runs a number of courses which you can apply for. So if you're serious.
In terms of, go on.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say, in terms of training, I think you're better off starting with YouTube and see how you go. And then if you think, like, I need to be more efficient about this, then that's when you call in someone like myself to do some training. You say we need to train a number of people to get to a position really quickly. But actually, if you're just starting out, type into Google, I want to make films on my smartphone, and that's a good place to begin.
There's a good festival called Mojo Fest, which is it was going to be in London this summer, but like all the other conferences, it's been it didn't go ahead. I don't know what's good. Some of them are going online, but normally it's been going for the last 5 years. So Mojo Fest is also a Facebook group, and I think they pretty much let anyone in, and that's full of a lot of people doing this stuff, sharing problems, sharing ideas. So that's definitely a good place to go. And I often tweet about my sort of things I'm trying out, or showing the films I've done and explaining how I did things. So that's on my Twitter handles on my video here, but I try and share stuff as I go along.
Yes, well, I think everyone should follow all of you, because I think you're all giving out great advice and content and stuff. So that's all from this event. Thank you to everyone who came. Thank you so much to our panelists, Vivian Morgan, Dougal Shaw, Toby Sadler. Thank you all for doing this. Do check out the RTS website, where there'll be a lot more of these sorts of events, so come along to those. And thanks to Dan Gowan from the RTS, who's done all of the technical wizardry in the background. Thank you.